So good morning to those who are going to watch this later, and for you guys who are already here. Uh, Dave Robinson again, and today we're going to tie a couple of different patterns. Florin's going to do something, and I'm going to do a pattern that I basically stole parts of out of this book, Flies for Bass and Panfish Fishing. And in looking through the book, there were a lot of popper style flies, and I was looking for something to fish Elk Lake where there are small perch. And I found this pattern here, which is a Clouser Minnow style pattern. Now, I had the good fortune many years back to actually meet Bob Clouser at a fishing show in Calgary. And he kept us quite entertained at the club booth and at the bar afterwards. He's quite a character. But he showed us the proper way to tie Clouser minnows. And there's a couple of tricks you need to learn. Now, I'm kind of doing things a little bastardized here. Normally, I would use a size 8 hook, which is this guy here, which is, sorry, this, yeah, that's a size 8, which is 2x or 3x long, but I like this pattern calls for 3 to 4x. So this would be the size 8 that I would use with the fly with the eyes that I have, but I'm going to tie it on the longer hook so it's a little easier for you guys to see what's going on and to illustrate some things. Thread, I'm just going to use some olive 6/0. A little bit, 8/0 would be a little bit thin because you really need to cinch these eyes down. So what I'll do is I'll start right behind the eye, do a few wraps to fill in the little gap where the eye is not quite finished. And then I'll wrap the shank of the hook halfway down the shank, all the way down to the halfway point with thread. And trim the tag off. So that's about half a shank. Then I will bring my thread back up, and I want to sort of measure this point by measuring how wide the eyes are from the eye of the hook to where the thread is hanging. That's a little bit shy, so right about there. I want the length of the eyes back from the eye of the hook. So almost a third of the way down the hook shank. And at that point, I'm going to wrap a big bump of thread. And this is the key to keeping the eyes from twisting around the hook shank. Is I made a good little bump of thread. You can see a substantial bump. And then I'll put the thread right behind the bump. Take the eyes and put them behind the bump, crosswise a bit on the hook shank, and make a couple of wraps over top and in front. Then you push them up against that bump and make a couple of wraps the opposite direction. And when you get there, you make sure they're square on the hook shank and you cinch them down really good. What that does is that pushes the gap between the eyes up against the bump, and that keeps them from twisting around the hook shank. That's one of the key things you have to do. Now, the other thing to do to have this, who is beeping?
Oh, that's me. I'm sorry. I'll do it.
Okay, not to worry.
Can't control it.
Now, to make sure, I'm just going to stick some super glue in there. So I don't want these eyes wandering around. And I'll just let that get a couple more wraps in there so it's good and solid. Then I'll bring my thread forward till it's hanging just in front of the eyes, maybe a third of the distance between where the eyes are and the hook loop. This is where we're going to start putting in our material. For material, the throat of or the bottom of the fly is yellow bucktail. And one of the keys with getting a long fly is you've got to have long bucktail. The problem with long bucktail, unless you happen to get lucky and get one that doesn't have a lot of taper to it, is getting it so that it's not too thick at the bottom here. So let me just make sure what's going on here. Okay. So there we go. I'm only going to take a small amount of bucktail, and I'll cut it off fairly close to the leather on the bucktail. And at this point, I will hold it by the tip, take my comb, and comb the fuzzies out. This will keep it from being too bulky where I'm going to tie it in. The next thing I'm going to do, and you're going to need a tool for this called a hair stacker, which is this guy here. I'll stick that in the hair stacker, tips down, tap them down. Then I'm going to whack it on here to even the tips up. Pull it out, and you'll see the tips are fairly even. Now I want to measure this. I want the body of the underside of the fly to be almost the same length as the tail. So I'll measure it from the bend to the eye. I'll take that and I'll put that down on the bend, hold it right at the eye, bring my fingers up and grab it right where the eyes are. Like that. Then I will trim it off dead square, about a 1/4 inch in front of those where I pinched it. So I have this little 1/4 inch bit here. Few stragglers. Now here's the trick that Bob tells you. You hold this thing at about a 45-degree angle with the very front end of where you trimmed it off just a little bit behind the eye of the hook. And your thread is just a hair in front of where the eyes are. Bring your thread up and down and cinch it down on top of the hook shank. And then bind this down to the hook shank, all the little butts that stick out in front. You see how skinny a nose that makes? That's one of the key things with the Clouser Minnow is you want to keep that nose from getting too fat. I'll bring my thread right behind the eye of the hook, the dumbbell eyes, and give 3 or 4 wraps just to cinch it down there. And then I'll pull the hair forward and do 3 or 4 really good wraps in behind, like that. And what that does is that keeps that hair on top of the hook and keeps it from sinking down into where the point of the hook is. At that point, I'll bring my thread underneath the eyes and back in front. From here on, we're going to turn that vise upside down, and we're going to be tying from the underside of the hook with the hook point up. Now to cinch this down, I'm going to do a quick little application of super glue here. And that just keeps the hair from pulling out a bit. As I have discovered, I didn't do it on this one, and all the green hair pulled out. So I'm going to make sure I have it stuck in there. Flash. You want a little bit of flash on this fly. So I've got some holographic tinsel here, and I have got some slightly yellowish crystal flash. I don't know if everybody knows this little trick. When you buy this stuff in the plastic envelopes, if you cut a little slit in the plastic envelope at the top, you can get your scissor points in there and just pull out a couple of strands. There's one, There's another. So I got basically 2 strands of this stuff, and I will trim them off. Then take that and I will double it over the thread so that the ends kind of line up. Lift it up and tie it down right in front of the eyes. And I'll take a couple of strands and cinch them down on the near side, still in front of the eyes, and 2 strands on the far side. I'll pull them back and cinch them down tight to the eyes, just in front of the eyes. And you'll see what happens is the strands lay there in the little V between the eyes, 2 on the near side, 2 on the far side. And I'll cut those off about the same length as the hair. That's a little long. And then the other one, the Krystal flash, will do the same thing. We'll get in here and find a couple of strands of Krystal flash out of the package. And I'll just pull them out like that. Cut them off. Wrap them around the thread. Bring them up on top. Set them down on the eye, on the nose of the fly, right on top. And then I'll split these up and put 2 on the near side, right close to the eye, and then 2 on the far side, right close to the eye. So I've got 2 kinds of flash in here, divided on either side of the fly. It's kind of resting down in between the dumbbell eyes. And again, make sure all this is cinched down. Bring my thread back so that it's just a little bit in front of the eyes, and let it sit there upside down. Now comes the green. The pattern would normally call for olive, but I have not got, I couldn't find my olive bucktail, but I found this green stuff. So I'm going to do a mix of the back dark olive and the bright olive on the front. And I'll do the same thing. I'll pick a small amount. I don't want to make this too bulky a fly. So pick a small amount. Do the same thing. Cut it off as close to the leather as I can get, because I want to maximize the length I'm going to use. Use the comb to pull out the fuzzies, because this will make it a lot easier to tie down. I will measure it again, this time to even up with the tail, and hold it right where the eyes are. Squish it flat. Wherever I put my scissors. Trim that off that same 1/4 inch in front of my fingers. There we go. And I will once again hold this down so that the tips are just a little bit behind where the eye of the hook is. Bring the thread up on the top, cinch it down. And what this does is when you hold it at that 45-degree angle, it leaves a spot here where it tapers that nose of the fly. And I'll cinch this down really good because I don't want this to come out like the other one. Once again, some super glue. Get it well saturated in there. And then the last little bit I'm going to do, I'm going to take some of this dark colored bit off of the shank of the hook, sorry, the bucktail. And it's going to be short, and it's not going to be very much of it. Just a little bit to add a little bit of color variation on the back of this fly. Okay, cut it off close. Hold it by the tip. Get rid of the fuzzies. Now, normally with a Clouser minnow, you'd only do two things, the top and the bottom one. This one, I want a little darkness in here, sort of a back of the fly to be a little darker than the middle. So I got 3 layers here. And I'll hold that in the same place as I did before. Square it off at the tips. Once again, I'm going to hold this at that sharp angle. That did not come out right. I didn't quite get it square. There we go. Now that it's square, you can see I can put this down here, right? So these little fibers are right at the eye of the hook. And I will cinch them down and build backwards from where the tips are tied in to get it a nice tapered shape to the head, the nose of this fly. Tapered from just behind the eye of the hook back to in front of the eyes. Don't want to make too big a nose on this thing. So, but I need to get enough wraps of thread in here to make sure that that hair is solid. And once again, it wouldn't hurt to have a little super glue in there, saturate it reasonably well. By the way, this brushable super glue, you can get it from Home Hardware for not a whole lot of money. And I will just finish this off. Make sure it's good and solid, and then we'll whip finish. I always on these like to do a double whip finish, just to make sure. And that's him. So you can see it produces in this position. This has got a light colored head, throat, and belly with some flash, segregating that from the darker olive and green. And that is your basic Clouser minnow with a little bit of an extra bit of bucktail in there. And that's basically, now when you fish it, it fishes upside down like that. Mm-hmm. That's why you put the dark colors on the bend and hook side of the shank. So it's going to fish this way. And one of the things that'll do is it'll reduce foul hooking a bit. We use Clouser minnows a lot when we're in bulkier sizes than this to fish as bucktailing behind the boat when we go up to Hanina. So I have a whole bunch of chartreuse ones that are just 2 layers of stuff with some flash, a light colored and a dark colored with a little bit of flash. And we fish those for coho a lot in August. So that's mine. So we can remove my view, speaker view, and we'll take me off. Come on. And Florin can do his thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I would take that Clouser and maybe a marker and give it a couple of vertical bars there.
Yeah, that's
to make it a little more perchy.
Yeah, I have this stuff here too, which you could tie as a streamer style fly with these on the side to give it those par marks.
Yeah, I have some of that hackle too. So maybe on this idea of tying perch flies for fishing locally here, I do have a sort of a 2-feather streamer that's fairly easy to tie. That
yes, And we were
I might
asking about,
do in a future session.
Yeah. And the reason we're tying perch flies is because Florin had a pretty, and I had a pretty good day out at Elk Lake, casting for bass, and we ended up catching a bunch of little perch. So it came to mind that if there are bass are there and there's perch out there, perch would probably be a pretty good lure for fishing for bass in Elk Lake. There we go.
How many perch did you guys have to catch to make a meal?
Depends on the size. If you these guys we caught were truly small, but if you have better sized perch, I guess it doesn't take an awful lot.
Well, you could probably, like I say, the whole point of that exercise was to find something that you could troll around the lake later for bass, bigger bass.
The biggest bass, yeah. And also be sure that if you're fishing that, chances are that carp are not gonna go for it.
Yeah.
So you'd be, I don't know how big the trout would have to be to be inclined to go after perch. Probably not rainbows. Probably brown trout might do that, but rainbows probably
I
not.
think that they're all trout are opportunistic feeders. They will eat what swims.
Yeah, but perch are spiky, so
Well, some of the rainbows are only insectivores.
Yeah.
Whereas the browns over a certain size, they're just carnivores.
Mm.
So there you go. This is the this is one of the mop flies. The way I understand it, a mop fly consists of a body of some kind of material, a wing out of some kind of a mop material, and then something sparkly at the head of the fly to give it a bit of, you know, like a hackle type thing. So I'm going to do a couple of flies today. I'm going to do this one, which was inspired by the standard blue fly used for pings, with the addition of the chartreuse wing and the sparkle bit, which were not part of the original program. And then the fact that a lot of pink flies seem to work well for a variety of fish. And this is a little pink extravaganza with chenille, where I did a bit of furled chenille here, combining a sparkly chenille with plain pink chenille, and then some kind of one of these, you know, fritz or blob materials that come in pretty strong fluorescent pink colors. Okay, this the pink fly has a slightly bigger brass bead. The other fly has a smaller tungsten bead. I don't want to overweight this fly, so I try to sort of dial down a little bit on the heavy beads if I can. All right, so let's go for the first fly. Just using blue thread to keep things looking very pretty, but you can use any color you have on hand. It really doesn't matter. But this is the fancy peacock blue thread. And then for the body, I like to use this particular tinsel that I respooled. You can see it here. So it's on a uni thread spool. And this tinsel came off this particular package. This is dollar store stuff, where for the lovely price of $1.25, you get 30 meters of tinsel in various colors. You get the blue, you get gold, silver, red, and this other one, which is some kind of a fuchsia, or I don't know exactly what to call this one. Anyway, so you can get these various colors, and in this case, because I'm trying to match the bead and the body color to just give the whole thing a blue feel. So there you go. Attach this at the front and wrap over the tinsel. By the way, the hook here is a size 6 saltwater hook. So this is kind of a bit of a standard size for a lot of the salmon flies from what I gather. And here I'm just going to wrap this forward. The fly is actually quite simple. And having wrapped over the tinsel backwards there, the thread, I get a very smooth underbody, which then also gives me a very nice smooth body for the fly. So then secure this. And this is something that I do on all the flies where I have to wrap any kind of, you know, tinsel-y material to get a nice to get a nice tinsel body. That's a good way to do it. Okay, now for the mop, I find that the official mop material is a little bit thick for this size of fly, and I may be very wrong about that because I have fairly limited experience fishing these flies. But then I found this thing in the fly shop that's called, it has this rather pompous name, UV Galaxy Mop chenille. But what it is, it's a chenille that has a little bit of sparkle to it. Okay? And it does work. I did tie a few flies with this stuff and they do work. So I'm a little bit sold on adding a little bit of sparkle into the chenille, even if I can't find this ready-made off the shelf. So I'm just gonna take the chenille and pull a little bit of the fuzz off to expose the core, so I can secure this. It's just this stuff kind of unravels easily, so you want to make sure that you've secured it as well as you can. And then the other thing that I found is, because of this unraveling business, I cut the wing a little bit longer than it needs to be. Something like this, perhaps. Or maybe this is the right length, but it does tolerate a slightly shorter length. And then just touch the end of the chenille with the flame from a lighter. That'll secure that end and you're not going to have unraveling problems. And then to complete the fly, the sparkle accent is this Palmer chenille, so-called, which is somewhere between regular chenille and these so-called polar chenilles, which have very long fibers. Polar chenille works too. On a size like this, you get something that's almost as long as the wing, and you get a different kind of effect. So you could play with this sorts of things and try different colors and so on. Okay, so I'm gonna tie this in at the head here. This one has a fairly thick and heavy core. And I'm going to wrap this on. And what I want to do with this thing, it's a little bit unruly. Ideally, so I'm trying to wrap this as a folded wet fly hackle. That's the effect I'm trying to achieve. So sometimes the easiest way to do this is to, if you have a rotary vise, is to turn the hook while folding the wing. Unfortunately, this almost requires a third hand if the fibers are not very cooperative, which these ones really are not. But that is enough to give me the bit of sparkle that I'm looking for. And the other thing I want is to make sure that I don't end up with a ugly gap behind the bead. So 2 turns, or 3 turns here to be on the safe side, and move the thread ahead and do another couple of turns there, and then trim the chenille. Okay, so now I've got my sparkle here. I can trim any sort of bits that are pointing forward. And now cover up the threads, the cut end with a bit of thread, so you get a smooth color transition there. And then a couple of whip finishes. And then I'll take this from the vise, I'll put it on a clip, and it'll get a little coat of Sally Hansen's right here over the threads. And this way you lose the fly before it comes apart.
You don't put any Sally Hansen's on the tinsel?
No, I find this stuff to be reasonably strong.
Ah.
If I were to use regular Mylar tinsel, then what I would do is I would put the bead on the hook. I would do a double wrap of the Mylar, starting at the head behind the bead, go to the bend of the hook, reverse. This way you get 2 layers, comes out, you know, all the gaps are nicely covered. Whip finish, put it in a clip, and do 10, 12 of these at a time.
Yeah.
And then varnish them all, let them dry. If it's a fly that's basically just got a body, you know, of tinsel, or in this case, I'm going to show you a well-worn fly here. See, this guy's been through the wars, and used to have a tail of Flashabou, which is gone. And you can see how what I was using here is some type of glitter thread, which is reasonably strong. But then again, on something like this, sometimes I would go as far as putting 2 coats of Sally Hansen's. So do 1 coat, let it dry properly, then go back, you know, and do a second coat. There's another fly that's, you know, kind of in need of maintenance and repair. You can see how it's pretty worn out. But you can also see that the body has not unraveled. So 1 or 2 coats of Sally Hansen, depending on what you're doing, will do the trick. So yeah, that's a good point to bear in mind. This particular tinsel, the dollar store stuff, I find to be fairly strong, and I end up, you know, losing the fly altogether before anything else bad happens to it. Okay, now for the pink version of this, which I do here on a regular, and you can combine colors too. I mean, here's another one that seems to work. That's these hooks are a little bit quite thinner in wire. So here you can see this is that whatever 2-tone blob fritz material, whatever it's called, with the same sparkly chenille that I put in the wing, and a slightly different body color, right? So you just, you know, you use this same principle and you vary the colors to suit. Okay, so what I did essentially is I originally tied some of these flies for trout. And then after testing, you know, Dave's blue fly in Campbell River and catching fish with it, I was kind of like, okay, well, that works. That's very nice. But what else might work here? So I tried some of those, and then I found that, well, when you fish for salmon, various other things happen. And here's an example of what happens.
Ah,
Is the bead is pretty well bashed. This fly actually fished actually quite well on. I was using a bit of a curved hook here, but the wire was not up to what I was inflicting on it. So the hook simply snapped. Yeah. And now I'm going to again to just I've tried to make the fly look pretty for the fellow fly tires when I open the fly box to show them. I don't think the fish care, but if you want to elicit oohs and ahs when you open your fly box, I think you really need to pay attention to these things. It kind of depends what you're tying flies for. Fish or oohs and ahs.
So you were trying to romance the fly fishers, Florin?
Big time, man, big time. I mean, it's like, that's the, I've done it myself, many times looking at somebody's fly box, I would go ooh and ah. And then I thought, okay, well, one possible goal of fly tying is to go for the oohs and ahs.
It's easier to impress fishermen than it is to impress fish.
That's also true. That is also true. So the process is, you will see, is essentially the same. So there you go. Build a body. So this is some kind of a red, pink. Color. I think this tinsel, the other color of the 5 there, I think there's a purple one too. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember. Okay, now for the wing, I don't have either a proper mop material in pink. When I went to the dollar store to look for mops, pretty much all I could find was chartreuse, and you can see the actual mop from those gloves they sell for washing your car or whatever. They're quite a bit thicker, and they have no sparkle in them. So what I did then is I decided I'm going to manufacture my own chenille with sparkly accents. And there you go, in pink. And I'll show you how to obtain something like this in a moment. So first I'm going to tie the fly. So here, obviously, I went a little bit too long, I think. With the, I need to trim this. And if you have very fine scissors and you're tying this kind of stuff, don't abuse your scissors. Use something that's a bit more of a sacrificial scissor. Oops. And sometimes the edges of the bead can be a little sharp, and if you're not quite careful enough, accidents like this can happen. I just have to rethread my bobbin here, and we'll continue in a moment. The program will resume after resolving our technical difficulties. Okay, there you go. Now I need to make sure that everything that was there gets... This is a very bad bead. That's giving me heck. Okay. This is also a little bit finer thread than what I was using before. But that's not an excuse. Okay, I'll try one more time, and if that doesn't want to work, I'll resort to some seriously thick thread here that is less likely to be so easily broken. Okay. So again, I just leave whatever thread was there before. Okay. I said I'm going to do it that way, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So this is 3/0 Danville thread. It's pretty strong stuff. It's become a little harder to find these days, like everything else. So now what I'm doing is I'm just securing the previous thread so it doesn't unravel and create a mess here. Okay. And then I'm going to use something again that's strongly colored in pink. This is a whatever 15 millimeter plus chenille. Now I don't know about the 15 millimeters because I've used 10 millimeter blob material that's almost as long as this, if not longer. So take these measurements with a grain of salt. So clean up a little bit the tip there where I'm going to tie it in so I can tie the core properly down to the hook. Give it a few good turns of thread, and then this stuff is pretty hard to do as a folded hackle. You know, just kind of do your best, but it's pretty dense, and so it does lay out however it lays out. You just, you know, try to pull those fibers back a little bit, and I'm just filling in the gap behind the bead as well as I can. Okay, so this looks about right. 2 or 3 turns is about all it takes to do this. A couple of turns to secure, and then pull all those fibers back as well as you can. This material, yeah, getting it a little wet helps a little, but not as much as you get with natural materials. Okay, so then proceed as before, a couple of whip finishes. So fill in here if you feel that the bead is still moving. So I guess I could have done one more turn of thread there. Sorry, of the chenille. So I don't like this thing to move. And then whip finish. Try not to catch any fibers from the chenille when I'm whip finishing. There you go. And then one more. Now this whip finishes are, you don't really need. In this case, you can see the thread is all buried behind the bead. So in this case, Sally Hansen's doesn't really buy you much of anything. Just this off, and there's the fly. Okay, now for the manufacture of the chenille. This is a fairly simple process, which I'm going to very quickly demonstrate here. So what I'm doing is I'm taking, I have here a little bit of Danville, medium or small. I'm not sure exactly what is this officially called, in fluorescent red. And then I have a spool of micro chenille from Reinig, which is pink. And now I'm going to take these 2 strands of chenille. I'm not going to cut them off just yet.
Back.
Put them together, sorry. And I'm going to put these guys together in the device. Okay, I may find that after having a hook in there, the vice jaws were too far open. Okay, this is good enough. Then I go about 2 inches and pinch the chenille. So here, I have about 2 inches from the vise to where I pinch the 2 strands of chenille together. And then I give it a good bit of twisting until this thing kind of comes together in a more densely packed chenille, which is also a little bit thicker. Then, in order to get things neater, you can do without this, but I'm just using a dubbing hook in this case. I just use the dubbing hook to mark sort of the middle point here. Bring the pinch chenille back here. Let it all basically twist back on itself. You can see what happened here. It's all nicely furled. And then take it off the dubbing hook. And this is done. Then, whoops. Normally this thing does stick to itself once it's properly twisted. I'm just gonna cut it off and put it on the bench. And now you just have this little bit of sparkle in there, not too much. You know, you can do it with other materials. I've been experimenting a little bit. So this is a different kind of chenille. This is a kind of standard old-fashioned Krystal chenille. And I took that Krystal chenille and I furled it in with the fluorescent pink as before. And what you end up with here is you have a much denser, much more density of the sparkle. Okay, so depending on what effect you're aiming for, you know, either one works. Or you can simply, you know, if you want to stay plain and simple, you can just furl the chenille onto itself, and you get, you know, slightly thicker chenille, somewhere between plain chenille and the thicker mop. Or you can go and I think you can buy this kind of product is available in some fluorescent pink colors as well. And that's my version of tying mop flies. I know Michael is here on the call, so he can add advice and wisdom on mops, because he's been fishing these things for a long time, I think, and certainly knows a lot more about it than I do.
Yeah, I basically do the same thing, same sort of thing, except I'll use different stuff for the hackle. Sometimes I just put a bunch of coarse dubbing into a dubbing loop and then use that as the hackle.
So do you use the sparkly stuff for the dubbing as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
They always have some sort of sparkle in the dubbing, or sometimes I'll add some bird hackle in addition to the sparkly stuff. All sorts of variations.
Okay. Well, that's today's program, I guess.
Very good.
Good. Sounds good,
Stop
guys.
recording, Dave.
Nice.
So next week, I'm not going to be tying.
Dave, you can stop the recording.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah,